Hello, my name is Jason, and welcome back to a new season of Intimate Discourse, where Dimitri and I, along with some of our esteemed guests, will discuss the pressing issues of the day and also explore some of the philosophical questions that tend to unite us all as humans existing on this great blue planet of ours. In our last episode last year, I made some allusions and even, I think, downright explicitly said that we would be broadcasting from our new studio this year and that there would be video and dancing girls and all kinds of exciting things. Well, events have transpired, and alas, this has not yet come to pass. We are still, as of now, an audio-only podcast, but we'll keep you updated as things move along. We have a bunch of great shows for you this year, and we'll be pushing them out to you at a regular cadence now that we're started, halfway through the year. In this episode, To Have and to Hold, Dimitri and I examine the benefits of delayed gratification, the meretricious allure of convenience. We discuss the proliferation of deepfakes and how such a phenomenon will affect media going forward. We discuss the values and perils of doing your own research, the God principle, questioning whether we need a new digital charter of rights, and of course it wouldn't be an episode of ID without discussing the meaning of life. This episode was recorded on March 19th, 2023 in Toronto, Canada. I certainly hope you enjoy the show. Hello and welcome to the show. My name is Jason. I'm here with Dimitri.
Hello, everybody.
Hello. You'll have to excuse my my voice. I feel like an apology is warranted just because I haven't I've had a cold or something for the past 2 weeks, and it's taken its toll on my
Maybe the
most prized asset.
maybe the maybe the feedback will be it's even better, Jay.
Maybe more gritty or real or
More
something.
rustic.
So today's show, try to encapsulate it in one sort of pithy catchphrase, and I will use a Moby quote and just say everything is wrong, and that's where I think we should sort of launch this. And we're really going to talk about the dissolution of individuality, or the fact that I think it's almost like as you go through, you take a look around you today in society, and just so many things are different, and there, some things are better, some things are worse, but there seems to be a trajectory in place whereby we are becoming less and less attached to things that are tangible, or things that are something that can be almost possessed in a way. And I'll sort of, I'll start this off by way of a little anecdote. When I was a Buddha boy, one of my favorite things is my dad. We used to live in, various suburbs of Toronto.
Hold on, sorry, one sec. You were a what boy?
What did I say?
Buddha boy?
I was a Buddha boy.
What's that?
No, I was but a boy.
But a boy. Oh, I thought it was a Buddha boy.
Buddha boy,
Okay,
yeah.
cool.
Well, see, there's the voice.
I love it.
And,
That's okay.
distorting what I'm trying to
like
say.
you're a surfer or something.
Right. No, there's not a lot of surfing in Newmarket.
Yeah, true.
So, lived in the suburbs of the city, and back in those days, they didn't have, they had CD shops and stuff like that in Newmarket, but there was nothing like what there is downtown. So, like, my dad would take me and my brother, I would say once every 6 months or so, down to the big town, and we would hit all the, down on Yonge Street, there was like HMV, Sam's, like A&A, and like World's Greatest Bookstore. There was like all kinds of places where it was just like, like going into, like an arcade or something. Like, it's just like everything was shiny and flashing and exciting. And we would spend the day like, CD shopping, like, listening to them, or like trying to find certain things. Like there was a song we liked, and I remember one One time I was looking for something. I was very young at this point, but there's a song. Remember Hulk Hogan when he came into the ring? He's like
yeah.
Real American or whatever
Yeah,
that song
yeah,
was called.
yeah,
And I, for whatever reason, really liked that song at the time. I was trying to find it everywhere, but I couldn't
it's the
find.
kids' version of Eye of the Tiger.
Yeah,
Like the sub 10 crowd. Yeah, for sure.
But I couldn't find it anywhere. I didn't even know what the song was, let alone how to find it. So I would be going into these places downtown and just be, like talk to the staff there. I'm like, it goes like this, and like kind of sing it, and eventually
That's such a funny kid thing, man. Do you into Bon Jovi or Whitesnake? Oh, I want the Hulk Hogan song.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
Yeah, it's slightly embarrassing now,
No,
but it's
great.
I was a kid, yeah, and but eventually I found it, and it was such an exciting treasure, and then it's like I couldn't wait to get back, and like we would go to the Pickle Barrel for milkshakes and everything afterwards. So it was like a real great day. And you'd come back home with all your little treasures and like your CDs you'd kind of unwrap in the car or whatever, and you'd get like a bunch of books, a bunch of magazines, like Bill Mazeroski's baseball thing was another big thing, and it was like it was just a very exciting day. But you came back, and it was, I don't know, you'd sort of ride that wave for almost like a week or something of just all these new things, these new albums, these new songs and everything like that.
Absorb it.
Yeah. And I think there was something about that maybe people don't have today, like kids don't have today, or like I would say, the kids of the day don't have those same kinds of experiences. So I thought of that idea and started, okay, what else is sort of like that is, you could sort of extrapolate that idea to a larger argument or something. And it's the same thing with like, continuing with the music thing. Like it's even the fact of like, any album, like Depeche Mode just released a couple of new songs, and it was like, right away it's available, like, and you can hear it, everybody's heard it. It's like, it takes you don't have to physically leave your house to like go out and buy it or anything like that. It's like right there, right available. And it's the same thing with like, you're listening to you're watching a movie, or you're like, you even hear a song on the, one thing you got me into this at Off Radio out of Greece, which is actually a really good station. I've got a lot of great music coming out of there.
That's amazing, yeah.
But you just Shazam the song, and it's like, okay, what is it? Now I know what it is, and that's it. And it's in fact, really irritating if you Shazam and it's like you can't find it. You're like, well, wait a minute, what do I do now? But in the old days, there wasn't that, and it was almost like a research project, and you'd have to talk to other people to find out if they knew the song, or if.
So what you're saying is there was value in actually struggling to get the research.
That's right. There is an anticipation. There was it was about the sort of the struggle to get something. Like, used to, if you wanted to make a dinner, you wanted to impress your girlfriend or something like that, and you could either cook a dinner or take her out to a really nice restaurant. And now it's so convenient just to like order in, and like you're never getting great meals. Like it's always coming in, it's a little not tepid or whatever. Like it's not as hot as it should be, and it's like packaged in, so all this is steam. So like there's, for the sake of convenience and for the sake of just like making things easier and having more stuff, like ostensibly that should be a great thing. You're like, well, we have access to any song we ever wanted. Same thing with Google. It's like, how many times are you talking to somebody and it's like, you bring up something, it's like, I can't remember what that, what street that house was on or whatever. And then it's like, well, let's just Google it. And it's like, I guess, like, or you could just sort of think about it and talk about it. And then who knows what you're going to discover while you flesh out that idea or whatever. But now it's like, it's just, everything is sort of instantly Googleable.
Yeah. And it might even, I don't want to talk about this part too long, but it might even just be on a neurological level less healthy. Like actually thinking about stuff and recalling and using your memory and everything else, Yeah. Probably we're too early into this digital age to know the 50 years effects on the human mind. Right. But you could say those who, do calculations in their brain actually have X amount of dementia less often. Like you could see all kinds of studies coming in the future. So, it's like you could have a pill that makes you skinny, or is it better to actually work out? Right. There's actually some value in taking it the slow way. On levels that we don't even know, like literally biological levels, social levels, biological levels, economic levels. Yeah. But in the end, if I was a 14-year-old and let's say we knew each other then, and favorite band came out with a new album, and like, okay, well, Jason, you stream it at the same time at my house, at your house, as I stream it at my house, and we'll be on our phones and we'll talk about it simultaneously. I think you could still find the bond over that.
I think you can find the bond.
That human connection over the shared experience of listening to music for the first time.
True, but I think it's more what you said. It's part of a struggle. It's the struggle that we're missing, which is, I think, integral to sort of growing as a human or growing as like I don't know. I remember the anticipation of those experiences. I remember waiting in the car, getting there. I remember like thinking, okay, this is the week we're going down there to pick.
And
these
you're in the
things
car
up
together, and it's communal, and you're chatting about that and other things. It's a whole process. It's a journey.
Yeah.
So you're taking out the journey.
Yeah, you're taking out the journey, and it's kind of like
you're just getting right to the end of the pot of gold.
It's like cheat codes in video games. It's like, okay, well, I don't know. It's like you could play a game, and it's like, oh, I have all the answers. You could just take this this little get this Easter egg, and then suddenly you're at level 8, and it's like, well, why are you even playing the game?
And what happens? The game becomes exceedingly boring right away.
Yeah, for sure. You need to struggle.
So would you say then? This is getting big fast, but would you say then, death is necessary to make life more valuable?
Yeah, it's a big. You're extrapolating there, but yeah, that's exactly. I think probably what it in the end boils down to.
Death gives us clarity at the finite amount of time and how to enjoy that moment as much as we can. Because if you didn't have that, then it would just be like, well, today, tomorrow, what difference does it really make?
Right.
Or I could there's something. I'm a big believer in this in general. Hitting brick walls in life is not good, but speed bumps are very good. Because it's delayed gratification. It means I have to actually think about it, struggle to do it. I must really want it. In that process, you're asking yourself a lot of questions like, how valuable is this to me? You're making an equation in your mind. Am I willing to put in an X amount of minimum wage hours in order to purchase such a thing? It actually, you're weighing all these different decisions all the time. And then when you actually go through to it, you know what? It wasn't just I got what I wanted in the end. It was the whole process of deciding even if I want this.
Right.
And how much do I really want to put in to get such a thing? There's a lot of value in there that cannot be monetized. And I think that's why you just don't hear about it much. It's just, we're really becoming a slave to convenience. We've talked about it before, but convenience, I think, is going to be like another deadly sin.
I mean, because if you take what you were saying a little further, and it's kind of like, you just sort of see the trajectory of things, like you're getting toward universal basic income, which, for all, I don't even mind that as an idea, but that once again takes another sort of struggle away from people where they can,
But you don't want them to hit a brick wall.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
It's all about getting the right amount of pressure. Like you're going to the gym. You don't want to lift so much weight you collapse, but you don't want to lift something that's so light that you're not getting any benefit.
Yeah.
You got to find that sweet spot, that balance.
There's a universal truth in that can be applied to a bunch of things, which is like you mentioned the physical or just the social or there always has to be something that you kind of overcome. That's life is about the struggle. It's literally evolution is constantly struggling for its own survival. The
hero's journey. It's the journey itself. You have to go travel to the underworld and have your revelation.
Right. It's woven into our mythologies.
Yeah. And now we're just like, no, you don't. Right. Hercules doesn't have to redeem himself for killing his wife and child. He's okay.
Yeah. And there's
and no lessons learned.
Exactly. And I think and I'll just sort of wrap this up. I think that this is what we're seeing now today. I've talked to a lot of, I have a few friends who are sort of, I would say late millennials or whatever, sort of in their early 30s. And it's like, they all, great people and everything. Everybody's a product of their times, but there's almost a sense of ennui. It's just, it's like not depression, but it's like, you try to, malaise. Yeah. Mm-hmm. You see them almost missing excitement. There's no excitement in their lives or something. It's not that their lives are necessarily boring. It's just that there's no they're maybe doing the same things, but they don't have that struggle to obtain it. So they're not, what do they care if, it's like being like a princess or something, where if you have everything handed to you, then you're like, okay, great. You just sort of.
In the stories, the princesses are usually quite bored.
Yeah.
Waiting for some Prince Charming to come into their life.
Right.
Everything's taken care of for them. Yeah. Yeah. But would you say then, I know you're into music like myself, what about concerts? The ticket prices have gone through the roof. Are people just dying? Actually, they don't know they are, but they're dying for that communal event.
I think they are.
You know?
I think they're not only for the
Is that the
communal
modern
event.
version of going downtown and getting the CD with your father? Like, you know, I just want to stand with 20,000 people and scream about one common love we all have together.
Yeah, that's I think that's why you see things like, for example, you know, this obsession with identity and trying to figure out and like, you know, almost delineate what exact single type of person you are that distinguishes you from the rest. And, you know, why things like NFTs or ordinals become popular. It's like people want to possess something, or they want to be able to, it's almost like reassure themselves that they're an individual with, and there's something that distinguishes them from everybody else. And I don't know, like I think, you know, going back to like CDs and sort of CD collections, it was sort of music that almost defined, I mean, I wouldn't say defined, you know, our personalities when we were younger, but they kind of did mold us. Like you hung out with people that were into the same stuff.
In the, you know, wasteland of suburbia, they certainly were like the cultural flashpoint to which you could see a much larger world pre-internet.
Yeah.
What do their shoes look like? What are their accents? What kind of haircuts do they have? Why are their accents like that? Why does the music video look like this? You know, would you say though that this is why vinyl records have made a comeback?
I think so. Yeah,
people want to touch and feel and be part of something,
and even just the analog business of that. It's something. Analog is different than digital.
The fact that it's fragile, subconsciously, you almost feel like you're aligned with it because then your own life is fragile. You know, and you have this shared. Finite time on this earth, this CD or record, my own 100 years on this earth, you know, like as things get more digital and as we become transhumanisms, into the transhumanism matrix, let's say, is this sort of like a backlash? Like kind of like, man, I need to touch and feel something and know that it has a finite amount of time on earth as I do.
Yeah.
I want to be part of stuff that actually will decompose. You know,
well, it's part of the human condition. It's part of, you know, you can't just beat all that, you know, thousands of years of evolution out of people, right? Like,
long form podcasts. It's really the version of which have, you know, the new phenomenon. Who would have known? Like everyone's into their news clips and their little feeds, but there's a huge audience out there that wants to sit down around the campfire for 3 hours and hear a conversation. Yeah. It really is tribal.
It is, yeah. And it's funny because sometimes, you know, you see them like Lex Friedman is sort of the worst for this, where it's like, you know, you look at his thing, it's like 4.5 or 5 hours. You're like, man, like that is a whole day. Like my days, I'm just going to be listening to your podcast.
Who has time for all these podcasts?
It's true. But I mean, but at the same thing, and I think of like a Joe Rogan, and it's like it's like you can spend 3 hours really absorbed in that conversation. And really it's comforting. Like there's a comfort you get from that you don't necessarily get from a, quick news bite or
it's intellectual curiosity, and as much I think it's also therapy.
Yeah,
you know, it's like I want and you know, it's like you can turn it off. So if it triggers you or goes in the wrong direction, you have the power. You know, so you feel like, I think a lot of people feel in a safe way. Like where else can you have a 3-hour conversation where you can just snap out of it? You know, like it's fantastic. It kind of does both. It gets you into the digital world and into the 3-hour conversation tactile world.
Well, it is. I mean, it's not really a conversation, but it is. But you simulates that.
You almost bit. When you have the one, and you know, you watch a lot of the summers. You feel like you could be one of the other people at the table. Like you're like the rhythm.
Yeah, you're just the quiet one.
The mindset. You know, like the way they crack jokes between the seriousness. Like, okay, I'm totally in this groove. You know.
Yeah. That's what I like about Rogan. It's not too, and I find it's very conversational. Like you're talking as if you're finding things out at the same level you would find it out if you were talking to the person yourself.
Yeah, and he does a good job of, I think, of modulating, meaning like when he's got someone really techie on, he'll give them their space and let them talk, but then he'll also
boil it down.
But he also kind of reverts to like a little bit silly to make sure that the audience doesn't get like, doesn't have to get too heady here with Eric Weinstein. Yeah. You know, and string theory. Like at a certain point,
but what a great, that, I don't know if you listened to the same one.
I got through most of it. Yeah. But he was doing like, also he would give him, but he would just like get really silly. Yeah. As someone said once to me, like Joe Rogan's like everybody's big brother who smokes dope in the garage, you know, like, but who knows, like, you know, the aliens, you know, the pyramids, but he actually knows a lot of stuff, and that's where he's emotionally intelligent, because he's very aware of like, okay, this is going a little too far far, I got to pull it back a bit.
For sure.
And so that you get a broad spectrum of viewers.
Yeah.
Like how can you get like the guy who likes to smoke dope in a garage also sitting down listening to somebody talk about string theory? Like, when has that happened before?
Yeah. It's and they're conversations like you would want to be a part of, kind of thing, because they're they're not just silly, and they're not just and they're not overly heady. They're sort of right in the sweet spot.
Short of being in a university classroom, you're just not going to get that type of lecture anywhere. You're not going to hear that on the news. You're not going to pick up Time magazine and read about that in any kind of deep, meaningful way. So what were you going to say then about this being the digital life?
Yeah, and I hope I'm making this point. There's something here. I don't know if I'm quite encapsulating it, but it's this idea. I feel like. Nietzsche said, in peacetime, a warlike man sets upon himself. And I feel like now it's like, are we all warlike men? Are we all, we have no battle to fight. And so we're occupying our thoughts, so
100%. This is the peak of civilization, and we're tearing ourselves apart.
Yeah.
It's the berry analogy we've gone through before.
Right.
We're hunting for all like the small little things that pull us ourselves. It's like we need that certain amount of tension in our world. Yeah, even if it's self-inflicted. Do you know, like I was listening to once, like there's an optimal amount of positive interactions to negative interactions in a marriage. So if you have I think it's around like 5-to-1. So every 5 interactions that were in a positive towards your spouse, if one is negative, that's pretty good. If you start going towards 4 or 3 positive interactions to 1 negative, you're headed to the road of divorce. But conversely, if you do 11 positive interactions to 1 negative, you're also headed towards divorce.
God, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, well, welcome to being human. Yeah. So there's an optimal amount of tension that we need in our life, even with your spouse.
Right.
You can't, come on, if it's like Coming to America, what are your favorite movies? Whatever yours are, my sire. Like at a certain point, you're like, what are your favorite fruits? Whatever. Just stand on a foot and bark like a dog. Like it gets boring really fast. You do want a little bit of tension in your life.
Yeah.
But not so much. Again, it's not a brick wall. It's more of a speed bump, but not so much that it impedes, your own growth and enjoyment in the relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. It's and I feel as a society more and more that ratio is getting extended. It's very dynamic because you'll have times where, for example, government censorship, that maybe we would rally against, but so that doesn't feel very that doesn't feel like the ratio is extending in the sense that everyone's getting along. But I think overall things are becoming more convenient. We're having more, things are just easier. It's easier to make money. It's easier. You don't necessarily need, in the old days, just thinking anything pre-1900s even, or pre-World War II, it was a real struggle. Like a lot of people were starving. It was, you had to maybe work 14 hours a day or whatever. And I realize that some of that happens still in places over the world, but it's just overall increasingly things are more easy, more convenient.
But we might have hit peak society. Maybe. That point where it's like literally you're getting butternut squash rigatoni delivered to your house at 11 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
What the hell?
And shrugging your shoulders. And, it's like you're getting I think of these old kings of Babylon or whatever. And they're, they have everything. They have grapes being fed to them. And it's like all these exotic cheeses or whatever they brought in. And, but you're bored. And you're like, well, I want a war or something. There needs to be some sort of struggle to almost define you. Well, again, it brings you back. You said this, I thought, quite eloquently one time, where this idea that when you're speaking to, you imagine your soul before you were born, and what would that soul want? Why would they want to be born? Why would they want to be a human being? And it was it wouldn't be because they wanted to just recline on a beach for 80 to 100 years or whatever.
What's the purpose?
Yeah, exactly. You want, I don't know, to struggle to achieve. And I think this is, not to kind of, I think this is part of the problem with, a lot of the stuff with everybody, even the anti-bullying campaigns, there's something about the struggle. I'm not saying bullying is good or anything, but it's there's something about that struggle to, through high school, of kind of finding yourself, finding where you sort of fit in, and overcoming adversity. It molds you into something stronger.
Again, speed bumps, not brick walls.
Right.
So, a teasing is fine, and then you get into a few fist fights here or there, but bullying, no, yeah.
Yeah.
That's too far. Yeah.
Right. But I mean,
But learning how to handle, because that's the first real adversity you're going to find in life.
well, yeah.
So if you can conquer that early in life, then congrats, you're going to have a much easier life.
There's a point where it's like you have to sort of stand up for yourself, and that defines you. I mean, how many kids these days don't have anything like, everything is very easy, and if they find anything that's slightly uncomfortable about how somebody's talked to them or whatever, they can complain, and it's like it's addressed immediately. Like how are they going to, when they face real adversity in the world, like how do they then handle that, right? Like
it's like team sports are so important, I know they don't do hitting.
And having a winner and a loser,
100%, yeah. But and then, it's up to the parents or the coaches to know that in the context of what we were playing, which is just for fun, that sort of thing. Right. But there is a winner and loser in that context. Yeah. It's not the life,
it doesn't define you as a loser forever, but it's...
100%, man. Oh, I was in a lot of fist fights from grade 5 through grade 8, like a lot.
Oh, yeah.
I had transferred schools, and there was another pack of kids that thought they were like the alpha males, and they kind of sussed me out like I was the other alpha male. Next thing you know, I'm wearing my winter gloves right into spring. I'm like, well, I'm going to get into a fight today. So these are like my boxing mitts. Like I had to prep myself and be really...
Do you have brass knuckles underneath?
No, I didn't go that far. You see, I'm not a psychopath, but I had a little bit of preparation, like, well, you think you're not going to get into a fight today? So I just wear them into the spring.
Yeah.
But but I'm really proud of myself during those years too. There was never 1 against 1. It was like 3 against 1.
Oh, really?
Yeah. 4, 3, 4.
This side of you.
Yeah. Oh, crazy. But like it makes you more gentle too, because you know what it feels like to be on the other side.
Yeah.
And to learn empathy.
Right.
I just thought those were just like kids who had honestly mental issues. Hate to say it like that, but you just say, what kind of family do they come from? That's what you think when you're 13 years old or 10,
Well, that's what you think.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. And as a 10-year-old, you're like, what kind of, a nice person wouldn't do this? So either they're not nice or they weren't raised nicely.
Right.
So even when you were pounding on them, you kind of pulled back a bit because you knew there's only so far this is supposed to go.
Right.
So then that's where you're learning. It's almost like when your dog, you have a baby dog, and it's learning how much it needs to bite on your finger before it actually hurts you.
Right.
There's a sweet spot.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But I don't know if the kids today have that resilience, or even if that resilience is even valued, if they're even talked about, endurance.
Yeah.
We used to talk a lot about character when I was really young, and that got changed around my teenage years to self-esteem.
Right.
I think that's a really pivotal change.
Yeah. You mean as opposed to character? Or
yeah. Like one replaced the other. Like it's not because character means you took your hits on life and made you the person you are, all that kind of stuff. Self-esteem is basically I feel good about myself.
Right.
Which is supposed to be as a result of building good character. But they kind of just skip to the end point.
I see what you're saying, yeah.
Like you said, they took the struggle out of it a bit.
So I guess this is where I'm, sort of going with this, is just this idea that now we live in a world where I see ChatGPT coming out, and I see deep fakes coming out, and I start thinking is everything just going to be what is more and more? I feel like we're just kind of losing the point of being human
or almost. Reality.
Yeah.
So is it in 1984 where they could just go in and so you could argue, having digitization of things is wonderful because it's decentralization, and now you can do a freedom of information, and all of a sudden you post it online, 100,000 people read it. This is amazing. We couldn't do this prior to the internet. Okay. On the flip side, though, it's also dangerously centralizing things, because you could go look for a newspaper article in 1984, and then people can just click and change the headlines from past newspaper articles, and you would never know the difference. You just delete history. So I wonder sometimes, are things like World War II, if it were to happen again, are people, or even now, are people going to look at it 50 years from now or less and go, well, how do I know that footage wasn't faked?
Yeah.
How do I know that war really happened? Because it can be show me the physical remains of what happened. You only have digital stuff. Well, that can be faked. So I just don't believe in it.
Yeah.
And, or something like religion, let's say. And if you were to take the Bible as a history book, but at least there's a physical document that has existed through 2,000 years. Yeah, it's been rewritten and badly rewritten many times, and politics and everything else, but at least there's a physical book. But if that was in a digital realm, you wouldn't have multiple variations of it. You'd be or centralized digital realm. This is the non-misinformation version that you should all read, right?
This is why I buy books as opposed to digital anything. And B, when I come across really good YouTube videos or something that I think, oh, like this is information that is, you save it. We have this great framed poster in my place that says, it's from the Chicago Sun-Times in 1945, and it's "Hitler is dead" is the main headline. It's this great old newspaper, but it's like, it's an artifact of the past. And it's like, I find that stuff so fascinating, and it's tactile, and you can look at it and you see the other little stories around it and everything. You're like, wow, this is a moment of time. What a great, incredible moment of time. But like, I think we move away from that, like physical newspapers. We don't really have much anymore. And it's like, you can make an argument toward, of course, it's better for the environment. You don't have to have this like inky paper around and everything like that. But it's like, you're missing something tactile that I don't think we can reclaim in any other
And I would say more tamper proof.
Yeah.
Like the digital realm, like forget it. Like it can be completely tampered. People are we're going to become just as disassociated from the last 2,000 years of history as the same reason why we don't know where we came from now.
Yeah.
Like where did that history go?
Right.
And because the Library of Alexandria got burned down and all the texts were taken away. Imagine that was a hard drive and you got clicked. Yeah. You know what I mean? Boom. Where did we come from?
EMP or something like
that. Yeah, it's done. Right? So I feel like we're almost setting ourselves up for like another almost like cultural amnesia.
Right, yeah. Well, and you can also see with the emergence of deepfakes, I mean, even now, you can watch these videos, and I'm sure you've seen the one where, Biden is talking about like something where you're being like there's no way he would say that. And it's like, of course he wouldn't, but that's, but they're so realistic. And this is just the early stages that like, who's to stop somebody just swapping out news articles? Like news travels so fast. It's like, all you have to do is have a convincing fake, and it's like you could start World War III. And
well, I think Elon Musk was saying that like one of the scary things with AI is that imagine in the political realm where because of your clicks online and your sort of internet digital ID profile, an actor, a foreign actor, a corporate actor could tailor a message specifically to you. So we're going to generate through AI the perfect, first of all, actor, like a person, how they look, to what you would identify with. So, white Christian man, age 50, this is what he would want to see. Then they can tailor and keep refining the actual message, saying, well, Jason didn't interact that time. Let's try another one. Let's try another one. Let's try another one.
Right.
And literally you can get then, oh, Jason, like, yes, I just totally agree with that point of view. You can then shape democracy.
Right.
Because, like, remember back like when Kennedy versus Nixon, and it was the first televised debate, and they said, well, he won because he was more photogenic and more charismatic on stage and that kind of thing, rather than was he actually going to be a better president, right? That was sort of the beginning of this, where it became much more superficial, and therefore we became much more malleable.
Right.
And I feel like if you can do that on an individual level, because they had to pick one guy, Kennedy, that looked good for the average American.
Yeah.
Right now we just have to make it good for you.
Yeah, it can be they can get really granular with it.
So when people say, well, they can follow my leads online, I don't care, I have nothing to hide.
Yeah.
They don't care about you specifically. But when they can see the you times 37 million people in Canada, they can get their pulse of the nation.
Yeah.
And then that's where you can really start changing politics. So imagine that then with like personalized, tailored messages through digital AI.
Yeah.
We may not have a democracy
in
25, 30 years from this. You're going to have a tyranny and we're all going to love it.
Yeah. Or so you want to put out a message that like, the war in Ukraine, for example, like Russia was justified in invading Ukraine, for example. You could have a message that is tailored, almost customized per individual, all selling that same story, the all overall, but in different ways that is more, would be an individual might be more susceptible.
Sure, like communism would have their campaigns towards the housewife and then towards the worker, and towards the children. Exactly. Well, imagine so that was ages and genders. Imagine right down to the atomic level, like each individual person. Yeah, it's deadly, and we are psychological beings, and so we're gonna feel it.
Yeah.
There's a reason why Jesus has blonde hair and blue eyes in England and looks more, Arabic, let's say, or Armenian in the Middle East.
Yeah, I think you get you can sort of see that You can sort of see that taking place, this kind of customizable, and you see it in, that's been around, advertisers tweaking things and for certain demographics and this and that. But yeah, you're right. Like it's getting very atomic in its application now, and I don't know really what we do about it. I mean, so
I think we have to employ all kinds of scientists.
You know what?
We've not just digital techie. Sorry, I mean, I think you can categorize people into two categories, broadly speaking. Mm-hmm. Those who are interested in things and those who are interested in people.
Right.
And the engineering mindset types are interested in things. Oh, I want to tinker around. This is so fun. It's clear, it's logical, it's rational, right? And that's the kind of person that likes to build these sorts of programs. Then you have the other kind of people, the psychologists, the mother or a father, if they were to take that on, a childcare worker, an author, a musician. They're more interested in like becoming, more interested in people. And I think you need to have both aspects rounding this out. You can't simply leave it in the hands of the people who are interested in tinkering around with things.
Well, it's just, we've been so, I feel like a broken record, but like, and I know this has been, said in many places, but it's like we're so interested in whether we can do it, then we're not worrying about whether we should do it. And there's so many things like you think about the Manhattan Project and how like people knew about that and kept it secret, right? Like journalists knew about it and they didn't report on it. You know what I mean? Because there was a common goal to sort of beat the Nazis. Mm-hmm. But like, can you imagine that happening today? Like, I can't imagine anybody like kind of keeping a secret like that, like in the common good. And like, how is there like everybody's sort of, I don't know. It's almost like in dissolving the individual, you're also dissolving the community. Like there's no, it's just like people fighting over scraps.
Well, I think you could still get people to believe in a narrative that they know is no longer true. Like, do people still believe the vaccines ended the pandemic? But no one wants, like, it's become psychological. Mm-hmm. You find people, they've all stopped getting the shots, but they really won't say anything negative about it.
Right.
Like I don't think it's a much more subtle form of psychological manipulation.
Yeah.
You ask them why, and they just don't really have an answer. So I think in that realm, I think things have advanced a bit, where it's like it's not really like a conspiracy, and it's more like a communal set of ideas that we all adhere to, and therefore you just won't, and then X, Y, Z, whatever the variable is, speak up, be a whistleblower or whatever.
I don't know. I mean, I still hear people talking about, like I think, Sam Harris, for example, will still go on about the efficacy of the vaccines and stuff like that. And it's like, he's a smart guy. Like I listen to him like a lot. And
so either he's exceedingly dumb or exceedingly ideological.
I don't know. I think it's like this.
Yeah, I saw him the other day on a podcast too. He's like, well, it was the moral right thing to do because it stopped transmission. What did you just say? Mm-hmm. Like in this, you're right. He's not a dummy.
But he has a good point.
Or is he dumb? Because he's just out of his realm and he's just eloquent and he knows a little bit about, when he talks in religion and everything else, he just kind of applies his very nice way of talking, but he's actually not particularly schooled in any of these things.
It's steeped in a deep, like it's very formulaic the way he sort of thinks, or at least the way he represents the thing.
True.
So like you have like he has listening to him the other day, he was talking about how it's important to have trust in institutions, and this idea of doing your own research basically is a dubious way of going about things, and but he qualifies. He's not saying like,
but it's very
you should
general.
Do some research, but you don't. If you find out you have cancer, you don't start thinking you're an oncologist and reading all these PubMed articles. So it's like, I think there's some truth to that. Like I think
but that's an easy low-hanging fruit.
Yeah,
that's an easy attack to win the argument.
My thing with the vaccines was always the censorship. It's like, look, I don't care. You might be right. I don't know. Like you're the doctors or whatever. But it's like, why are you blocking these other people from speaking? And don't tell me it's misinformation.
Because they're causing the thing that Sam Harris is saying. They're giving doubt to the institutions, and therefore people are going off and doing their own research. So to stop, it's like having heretics in a little Christian town. Well, we just can't handle them because it's going to get people stop coming to church. They are the heretics. Mm-hmm. That's why I think it's a very low-hanging argument, fruit. I don't think that's a very strong. It was probably the easiest straw man he could attack such an argument on.
Well, I think that
as opposed to actually engaging the data that the people are actually reading here.
Yeah, I think that. Yeah, I mean, I disagree. For me, it's all about the censorship, and but it's. Excuse me. There's it's it's interesting because, I think you were just saying about how, the vaccines, like who really even believes that anymore or whatever. But I'm saying like,
I don't think he believes it. I think he's totally doing exactly what I said. I think he's just formulating an argument so he doesn't have to deal with this demon in his mind. It's like, even if those people were proven right, it was far too risky of a gamble. And therefore I'm going to just gamble in this way, because maybe they were right this time, but they will probably be wrong the next 9 out of 10 times, and that's not good for society. I think he's kind of chucked it in that sort of algorithm like that in his mind.
Maybe.
So therefore, it's the mechanism of thought that matters, not whether they were right this time around.
Well, and you would know this better than I would because you sort of talk to more people on a daily basis. But like, are you sure that it isn't just that you're sort of in a bit of a silo in terms of where you're getting your information from, that so many people are outside?
You have to be aware of this, for sure. No, the average person, proof isn't the pudding. Was it like 80% of people in Canada are more than 160, 180 days out of having their last booster? So the average person has stopped going.
When are you supposed to, like, how often are you supposed to be getting
You can get it every 90 days.
Really?
Yes.
So it's not like there's like a 4th booster, and like I thought we were sort of stopped.
No, now we're in this phase now. Every 90 days, if you wish to get it, you may.
Oh man, that's crazy.
What is it?
Well,
are you doing your own research now? That's what they've said.
No,
I'm just saying, like the people have stopped going, and people's masks are mostly off, and that sort of thing. So you can just see their behavior. But if you were to quiz them, they would still say, "Well, it was great because it got us to this happy place." And if you were to break it apart, they don't have an argument. So then it just all falls apart.
Yeah.
So I think they've just kind of done that sort of like an informal non-disclosure agreement. They all just kind of agreed it didn't work, but we're going to go on with it. We did what we could. That's what they're going to kind of memory hole a lot of this stuff.
Not to belabor this, because it bothers me when you're talking to somebody and they kind of switch what you're talking about. Like the problems I have with the vaccine isn't that I think necessarily the vaccines don't work. I mean, they don't, like in terms of like protecting you against the virus, but like
Carol, about protecting you against infection, certainly, which eliminates all the reason for community, like mandatory reasons.
Right. But so what I'm saying is the vaccines probably did protect you in the sense that you weren't getting as sick. So I can certainly accept that. Yeah, I can accept that. Yeah. But even if that's the case, but the problem I had was the censorship, number one.
Sure.
And number two, this idea that like you're talking about something that is for the vast majority of the population not that deadly or anything. So you're really weighing apples.
Remember the slogan in 2021? You're not safe. No, we're not safe until we're all, wait, what was the slogan? Nobody's safe until we're all safe.
Right.
Like talk about chunking everything together, and like that's so anti-scientific.
For sure, yeah, for sure.
That's coercion 101.
But that's the problem I have. So you're talking about a fundamental problem with how we're dealing with it, not specifically about the vaccines or their efficacy rates or whatever. I mean, certainly
it's
question
the mechanism
that
of
too,
censorship and bodily autonomy, and
like that's the problem.
And that to your credit, I mean that's the larger picture, because this was just one thing today, but tomorrow there'll be something else, and the next day something else, and it's like, what kind of society have we formed here?
Mm-hmm. And so I'm sure, obviously, you know about the commission investigating whether it was the Freedom of Information Act, whether they had the right to seize seize bank accounts when they were doing that. And it's like, yes, we do have the right.
Yeah, we have investigated ourselves and formally come to the conclusion that we were right.
Like, what a joke, man. That's...
So and not to make this, it's not a COVID episode, but it's like the underlying mechanisms. Like when you have commissions that were, poor guy, I don't know if you're watching the Emergencies Act Commission, and it came down like one guy, like a judge, commissioner, and even his final statement was reasonable people of reasonable intellect can look at this data and come to the completely opposite point of view.
Right.
So, and you left that in one hand. You couldn't have you go to a school trustee meeting these days and there's 75 people in the room. It's freezing bank accounts and you leave it in one person to decide whether it was right or wrong.
Yeah.
And I don't begrudge the man. He's liberal. He can be whatever party he wants, but at least you could have 3 or 5 different professionals there coming to an average answer. So much for the democracy of that.
Yeah.
So when you pull this back to AI and like deep fake, like it's all part of the same package. Like it's like the individual versus collectivism. Like, you got little things like little cultural quirks, like, it's kind of just, maybe it's just slipping into our world, but you say about digital IDs, but then also like, it's called the iPhone. It doesn't get any more individual than putting the word I in it.
Right.
The iPad, right? It's kind of like the blending of humans and machines. And yeah, just like that sort of, like I was saying, blending of humans and machines, or blending of everything. Like, we had two genders. Now it seems to be almost an unlimited number of genders. And at some point then it's like, well, we got so many genders. What is gender? It's like, remember I told you once, like diversity in its ultimate form just becomes decomposition. Like you actually don't have anything left of a core anything in a sense, right? So, taking that back a little bit to the way, the way they're straw manning certain things, like people like Sam Harris, I think they just have one or two different ways of formulating their thoughts. And in certain realms, they're very researched on, and other ones, they just kind of go with consensus. Like when he was saying, how did you say it? Like he was saying, the dangers of you just going off and reading your own research studies. Well, first of all, those research studies are done by researchers. They are professionals. It wasn't like I just went to ask the Oracle at Delphi, what shall I do?
No, but I think there's a point. I think it's more like, I think that the research you're doing, for example, is much more rigorous than the research that sort of your average guy who's like kind of...
Don't get it off TikTok.
Right.
There is a good way to do research online, and it's not in a short, easy, convenient form. It's arduous. And you have to take it seriously, and you have to know where you're going for it. But to simply sit there and say, I remember one time he was saying regarding climate change, like, well, 97% of scientists agree. So are you going to side with the 97% or the 3? Well, can we actually look at that 97% to break it down? And is that a real number? And how did we get to that number? Like, let's do some science here now. You're just taking it like, well, then the high priest says, we must, the world was created in 7 days. So who am I to argue I'm just a poor farmer?
But his point isn't that it's a high priest. It's the high priests, plural, of the land.
It seems like that. It seems like that, but I've seen really good detailed analysis of such things. And again, it's not a climate, so it's just like the way of thinking. But that consensus is not really there. And now that's a mirage. We're getting to like the Wizard of Oz a little bit. If that consensus is not there, first you got to ask yourself, why did they fake the consensus? And where is the real consensus on this?
But I think this is where it gets into it. And I'm not, like, for how deep down the rabbit hole do you go? Because you talk about they, right? That's thrown around a lot. So who is the they? Who is the cabal?
Well, going back to what I was saying too, I don't think it's a set. Conspiracies. Like you look at something like the World Economic Forum, you could cut off the head of the Hydra. It doesn't really matter because it's a set of ideas, and it's like that ethos, that set of ideas that keeps going. So then people, like I said, it's almost like we now have a sort of subconscious non-disclosure agreement to really question what the government did the last 2 years because it was so traumatic. It's like, well, have you ever heard of that psychological experiment before where very briefly, 2 groups randomized, pumping water into a well. One group did it for free. One group got paid 25 cents an hour. And at the end of the experiment, they asked each group, how valuable of experience was that to you? So one group got paid for doing it. One group did not get paid. So which group do you think said it was more valuable of an experience?
By virtue of the fact that you're bringing this up, I can guess the people who didn't get paid. But
however, most of the time you'd say those who got something out of it,
right,
for the 25 cents. They actually reported less satisfaction because they figured, well, 25 cents isn't very much.
Yeah.
So I did all this for 25 cents an hour. My God, it wasn't worth it. But the person who did it for free said, well, I didn't get paid anything, and this must have some residual value. Therefore, yeah, I will rate it as a very good experience overall. Right. That is, in a nutshell, the psychology that goes around like the last 2 years. And whether you want to call it a conspiracy, COVID, WEF, mandates, like people will just chunk it as, well, we did it and I'm still alive. It must have had some residual good and I'm just going to let it go. As opposed to tearing it apart. Because the tearing apart is very difficult psychologically. Like to admit you've been lied to or fooled or you're part of something. Do you think, imagine what it was like for trying to like bring back those people that were on the side of Hitler in World War II who weren't totally into it, but weren't dead against it. They kind of just went along to get along. Yeah. They are the 97 fake consensus that went along with it. Were they really into it, or were they just kind of silent because they didn't want to face any sort of retribution?
I mean, it's actually really interesting always bringing it back to World War II and bringing it back to like, because there was a country called Germany, and there were like the population more or less went along with what was happening, and whether they just didn't say anything or whatever the case, most of them weren't, in the streets revolting. So like,
nice people sorry to cut you off. They went very highly educated. You almost have to be highly educated to fall for such a thing. This is part of the way it works. A highly educated populace fell for one of the most heinous crimes, and I hate bringing up analogies and metaphors towards that, because it's such a I don't want to call it a one-off event, but that danger. But the reason why I bring it up is because that lurking psychological weakness exists in every human today.
Yeah.
And so how to not have it repeat, even in a softer form, like COVID mandates or digital tyranny or whatever. Like it's the psychological, like us versus them, consensus, 97 versus 3. Like Sam Harris is trying to say, I'm going to go off the experts. You think it wasn't the expert class that was telling the people that they had to do the final solution? And the average farmer is going, well,
they're the experts.
You're the experts, Hitler and friends, and there was a bit of that.
Yeah.
And so where were the people to stand up and say, you know what, maybe I don't know everything, but I know that this is wrong.
Right.
And we need to find a better answer. And I'm just going to say, stop now until we find a better answer. So that's where you are, I think, too. Like I've encouraged people to get vaccines. I'm not anti-vaccine, and I'm talking about the new mRNA ones. I'm not anti-vaccine. I'm simply like, make your own decision.
Yeah.
I
think it's interesting. We really did see, during the COVID pandemic, you saw that same flash of, I don't know what you'd call it, ignorance or just, whatever the word would be for brainwashed. I mean,
hurting.
But you saw that in their eyes. Like I would talk to people, and it's almost like this gloss over their eyes where it's like just kind of squawking back everything they just saw on TV. And it's like, how do you communicate? It's like, you didn't get the memo that this is all like, You realize you're totally swallowed the Kool-Aid.
I had a very visceral experience with that psychological mechanism with a very nice client the other day. And she does consulting work for pharmaceutical companies. So historically, she would say things to me like, well, I was really great when I got to meet them in there, because one doctor I met who worked for one of the pharmaceuticals said, well, do you know why I didn't become a family physician? Because there I could only help a couple hundred people. But when I work with vaccines, I can help millions. Like it really becomes like a religious ethos. Like I can help shape the planet. And so now the client is giving like, isn't it amazing? She gets to do this amazing work with this pharmaceutical company. So she's all in. I would say whatever the maximum amount of doses she can have. So by all in, I'm saying she's all in mentally into this sort of world. Okay.
Right.
And when I was performing a service for her the other day, she turns to me, she goes, I woke up this morning and I was reading the Globe and Mail, and I was so happy because they said, this is going to be, the Globe and Mail had written, this will be our last report on COVID. We're not talking about it anymore. It's over. And I know what the subtext of that was because I've pushed back against her gently every time she's been in my business regarding this sort of stuff, is that she's basically saying, I know I'm wrong and I don't want to talk about it anymore.
Right. Yeah.
But she doesn't want to come out and say that. So she defers then to an external mechanism like, well, the Globe and Mail authority has said, we don't need to report about this anymore. It's over.
Like,
isn't that amazing?
Well, it's amazing that the Globe would put in, like, what are they saying? Just as a disclaimer. It's like, look, this is over.
Well, I don't want to maybe the number of reports, the cases, hospitalizations, like basically it's not worth the time to report.
Right.
And she was happy that we've reached that point, meaning the way I interpret, like, we don't need you and I to talk about this anymore either. It's over. Instead of saying, well, you know what, Dimitri, I had my questions, but on some of the points, I think you were actually a little ahead of the curve, and congratulations. And not that I'm asking for that. It's for her sake to see that she was fooled.
Yeah.
I don't care.
She'll make the same mistake next time.
Exactly. Over a different thing.
Yeah.
So now when it comes down to, this has been a very interesting experience and experiment over the last several years. We have really torn away that thin veneer of society and got down to each individual, like, who are you and what are you really about? And if a World War II-like scenario were to happen again, what side are you falling on?
Yeah.
Are you going to be that dissident that says, no, I'm not following the expert class? That's a very hard thing to do.
Yeah.
And vast majority can't. I would like to think this experience coaxed those who are still alive to realize they got fooled and to not be fooled again. I mean, just to bring it back a little further, I think this will be it, but Did you know, like, the expert class in the UK, what they've said now about vaccination there going forward regarding COVID? I see that twinkle in the eye. You know it's coming. Under 50 years of age, unless you're immunocompromised, you can no longer get a booster.
Right.
Right. So if I were to say that here, I'd be a heretic.
Yeah.
Here meaning North America.
Right.
But their expert class has said that's okay. It's like we have the Protestants versus the Baptists,
Right.
who's got the right gospel now, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So doing your own research should entail, of course, listening to verified, qualified, and up till that moment in time, very well-respected individuals. Doesn't mean you just get to throw them out of the bus and pull like a Twitter files and go, well, we're just going to, did you see what happened this week? Yeah, so to our listeners, I don't know if anyone knows that, but in the UK, you can't get a shot under 50 anymore. And that just sounds like, I tell clients that, like, really? You can see it's like saying, like, you don't need Holy Communion when you go to church or something, Like, no, you will go to heaven without communion. You're going to be okay. And they have this look of absolute disbelief. And then the eyes glaze over and they go back to the regular programming. Right. It's literally psychological programming. So it becomes like a subconscious non-disclosure act. Nobody seems to want to really know. And that's exactly where the governments and the pharmaceutical companies want to be, because then there's going to be less public pressure to do any deep inquiries.
Yeah. I think also and I'm just going to briefly touch on this, and then we can kind of move on. But it also has to do with I don't know if it's maybe an older generation or what it is, but this idea of people doing their own research almost harkens back to like people, 20 years ago who are like kind of putting together newspaper clippings like maniacally all over their apartment. And people go in, the police comes in to investigate something and they're like, oh my God, this guy's obviously insane. But it's like we have so much more access to information now. And there's so much stuff that we have those other expert class articles from,
And there's a good way and a bad way to do anything. So, when the French would meet in some underground tavern to talk about les résistance against the Germans, well, how do you know the French government was going to do any better than the Germans anyways? Look what they've done. They're the expert class. Really? It took, and those were, by today's standards, relatively uneducated people, but they decided right. Which is funny, bringing back to COVID, you could argue my position on this was actually more risky. The safest road through this would have been to get 2 shots, overall, I'm saying, psychologically. You get 2 shots, you wear your mask. The second they tell you to take off your mask, you take off your mask. Done. You didn't undercommit, you didn't overcommit.
Right.
My position was a little riskier. I got perhaps lucky, on this round. Maybe, to Sam Harris's point, I won't get so lucky on my decision-making tree next time around. But certainly to be on the other side and say, well, shots for life and keep masking because it's a virtuous thing to do also isn't right.
Right. Yeah.
And it's about getting that balance just right.
Well, and it's also important to make sure that you inject your own, people are different. Like people know their own, maybe they don't know their own immune system intimately, but they know what they're generally whether you're healthy or you're not, what you're comfortable, what your risk tolerance is. So people make different decisions. This wasn't the Black Plague, it was like, something where you could look at the stats. It was very clear what the death toll or the, mortality rate and everything was. So it's like you make a decision based on your age cohort, and it's like, okay, well.
Do you know who let us down the most? Your family.
Trudeau?
Well, yeah. Wow. Yeah. No. Yeah. That's a whole series of podcasts, and in a psychological dark realm. No, your family physician.
Right.
They are your closest expert.
But
how much did they say? I was at my family physician the other day doing blood work, and I said to her, at a certain point, her nicest lady in the world, and at a certain point, her mask was, we have to wear a mask to go in. I'm like, okay, no problem. I'm not a jerk. I follow, fine. I'm like, said to her at a certain point, because her mask was like underneath her nose as I'm in the office with her. And I'm like, have you seen the Cochrane review on this stuff yet? And she's like, no. I'm like, well, do you know the Cochrane Institute is, and for our listeners, it's one of the most elite, prestigious, reviewing mechanisms in America for medical stuff. And she's like, oh, I know what Cochrane is. I'm like, okay. So you haven't seen the review yet, though? No. I'm like, well, don't shoot me. I'm just a patient here. But what they say is that in their meta-analysis of all the randomized control trials on masking, I think there was 78 of them altogether. They dropped out the observational trials because there's too much bias, pro or minus, in masking. All masks have no community benefit. None. Zero. You can say, sneezing into your arm has a community benefit, has an individual benefit, turning your back. But to say you do that every single time over the next 12 months, does it stop the rate of spread? No. So something to that effect. My point is, she's an educated person. She's my closest expert at arm's length that I can actually get in touch with. And she had not even heard of the review. Never mind have her 2 cents. Well, Dimitri, I have read it however I think for those who are like something. Just give me something. She didn't even know.
Yeah.
So then if the expert class that is closest to you don't know the most pertinent reviews that are out there, where's the individual supposed to go?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think what this pandemic has taught us, one of the sort of takeaways from it is that the family doctor is just a person and really shouldn't be revered as more than the fact that, they know more than you, generally speaking, about basic physiology and
but in a time of a pandemic over something that was mandated, I would say
you would think they would have a little more.
Takes priority, and it's something that should hit their radar. I'm very sympathetic. They're tired, they're hardworking. The young doctors have a lot of debt when they get out of school. Like, totally get it. But this was in the middle of a pandemic. I'm not asking whether vitamin B1 will lower my blood sugar,
right?
And whether she wants to get into that or not, or nutrition in general. Like, it would be nice if they knew about that stuff, but okay, fine. It's not their realm. They're a portal to big pharma and to your specialists who may know more about these things. Yeah. But it's just disappointing because, the mother will walk into the pediatric and like hope to hear something, and they get like put a mask on your 2-year-old,
right?
Which was then proven through science, through experts, don't do it. Countries that masked versus countries that didn't mask had the exact same rate of COVID spread.
But there's something.
So it's quite something. So where do you put the trust in expert class after that?
Yeah. I agree with you, although I will say something like masks, it's not that, like, it's almost erring on the side of caution, right? It's like maybe it works, maybe it doesn't work, but what's the harm in having people masked?
The harm would be psychological and coercion into obedience to, then I'm sure you could make an argument, countries that masked had higher rates of booster uptake than countries that didn't mask. And I think the two are related.
Yeah. Well, but on an
because you have fear on a daily basis, you're more likely to go get that next shot.
Well, the government.
So now you're being coerced.
Yeah.
You're using this, but what seems to be benign and like low-hanging fruit mechanism, which can help save another person's life, it's really just being mostly used to coerce you into getting another shot.
Right, at a government level, but on the individual business level, if a doctor is like wants people masked going into their office or whatever, then I get that in the sense of like if you haven't done all the research and you're not up on the latest studies, it's like.
But it has to have efficacy, and if there's no efficacy, and so I would never. If someone asked me to put one on, I put one on. If someone asked me, I would just decide whether to want to go back to that place or not. But I wouldn't go get in their face and be like, "How dare you?" I just vote with my dollars and move in a different direction. That's all.
But okay, that being said, and because you're more up to date on this than I am, are the N95 masks not effective?
Not effective on a community level. Full stop.
So what does that mean? Like if I wear one, am I not more protected?
If you wear one, you are more protected on an individual level. So that's why I would never make fun of someone and not really discourage them on an individual level to wear it. But to say there's enough community reduction in spread by wearing such masks, because they don't wear them correctly, they don't change them every 3 hours. There's all these human factors. You can put children in hazmat suits, but you're not going to be zipping them up properly. Right. Like, so there's that. So there's again, it kind of goes back to like the engineering mindset versus the psychological mindset and being interested in people. If you look at it from an engineering problem, does it filter X amount of particles per hour and therefore stops? Yeah, perhaps it does. Sure, you can make that. Will people actually use it in that way? Mm-hmm. So again, it's the same way of thinking that brings us back to AI and stuff. Like we have this world of AI. Will it just become like allow us to achieve our darkest secrets? Like where are humans going to go with something like this when we're allowed to? Because I see parallels into all. That's why I don't mind segueing into this sort of stuff, because going back to AI, now that someone would say, well, what's the problem of XYZ? I get to have more pleasure more often, sort of thing. What's the harm in such a benign act? Well, you know what? There is harm in that. What do you think?
Yeah, well, we've talked about this before because it's easy to play the devil's advocate for that narrative. Like, it's easy for me to say, I think we talked about it in the context of the metaverse, and it's like, if you could be strapped up to a machine and all you're getting is pleasure all the time, you could do all the things in the world that you would want to, jump off buildings and this and that, and never have that same risk. And that reality is just as real to you as any other reality. What is the harm? You know, like that would be a reasonable argument to make, I think.
Like, I think I've heard it put it this way, like, it's like, what are we putting our attention on? And if you're putting your attention on the mask, you know, I think it's misplaced attention. You know, if you're putting your attention on, you know, like, what is the higher goal? If you're putting your attention on through digital AI and algorithms that now become your new best friend, and you don't have to go through the hardships about what a real friendship is all about, it just becomes like self-serving pleasure.
But maybe you're going through those hardships in the context of the alternate reality. So you're actually engaging. For example, you have to still climb that mountain in the reality, and your brain believes that it's real, although you don't face the same risk of falling off.
Yeah, like I was saying before, like marriage, you have to have the optimal amount of positive interactions and negative. But if it's simply all just positive, you're going to hate it.
Right, like they'll have rainy days in the metaverse. You know what I mean? It won't.
But if you have the ability to skip that song, you will. If you have the ability to like, screw off AI, I want you on the nice side today. What do you think the average person's going to do? They're going to do bring it back to Gary Newman, they're going to do the pleasure principle.
Maybe they have to build in struggle into the system.
That you can't actually forward. But then is it really, I'm like, well, this is mine and I just want to do what I want with it.
Yeah, then they're just replicating life. Which is, we already have that.
Yeah, and which really is replicating, like, it's increasing power. So then you got self-serving pleasure that it skewed towards increasing your power over things. I don't think that is a healthy psychological place for us to be. I think it's actually anti-human.
Well, so this
is like how, I think this is how the image of the beast actually manifests itself. If there's like the banality of evil, this is exactly where it kind of comes out of. Yeah.
I think, well, here's something that I'm going to digress a little bit. What do you think of this idea? So I have this sort of principle or whatever called the God principle. It's like, I do believe in God. And I think that when I look at the world and I feel like, you know, everything in my own life and everything in sort of the rest of the world, there always seems to be like this last minute sort of saving grace or whatever, where it's like, you know, the Cuban Missile Crisis, like, oh, well, surprise, they, you know, averted disaster. Like, and I know that's a dangerous way of thinking in terms of policy and stuff like that, but just hypothetically, I see this stuff play out and I'm like, oh, like, thank God, like that got resolved or whatever. And I wonder if it's like, we're not in some sort of game like that. And that has been built in. So it's like basically, don't worry, you still got this struggle.
You can push it to the limit.
You can push to the limit, but at the end of the day, you're still going to get saved. You just won't know that that's always going to happen.
I don't know if I was thinking this strongly, or we've done this in a previous podcast, but I got this theory. That's what Omicron was.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You know, like, why are we here? Because of masks? No. Are we here because of vaccines stopping the spread? No. We're here because Omicron is now sufficiently not dangerous enough to warrant such things. And bringing it back to like that sort of stuff, like the tech that was used during COVID was the closest we've ever been to like institutionalized authoritarianism. Yeah. So that's where the tech, you know, see how it all blends together now? Like, it's like, what are we actually building here? So I wouldn't be against fun coffee talk, whether Omicron was let out by some white-hatted lab coat wearing,
right? It's like
happy, you call it good guy scientists, or you could even argue that it was just freaking nature manifesting a solution.
Yeah,
like we're not fucking going in this direction. End of fucking story.
Right.
Remember around Christmas time, they were trying to talk about the Kraken. You got this new they actually give a name to the subvariant. You're not supposed to give names to subvariants. They're like you got Jimmy Fallon up there singing like BEX. Did you see how crappy that was?
I don't know.
He was doing it to like a Rock Lobster or something like that.
Okay.
And they were like singing out the name of the technical name of the newest variant. Like, what the hell are you doing?
I don't know. That's
BEXY 2x5, and he goes on. So you're basically just through happy means of the expert class, because he's part of that media, social media, you know, like telling the masses to be afraid. And so who was right in November when we said, no, you know what, we don't need to wear masks? When Kieran Moore, our medical officer here in Ontario, said we should wear masks again in public, and then like 2 days later he's caught outside not wearing a mask in a private event somewhere. If we had done what they said, the expert class, would the cases be any different? The Globe and Mail just said we're not going to record on it, and masks have been taken off. The expert class was wrong. I think there's something to your God principle that it exists in all of us. And that's where we become a little bit like herd. And this is where democracy is beautiful, because we just simply vote. At the end of the day, they can only do to us, like they say, you get to the government you deserve. They can only do to us what we agreed to have done to us.
Yeah.
If we simply say, you can recommend all the fucking masks you want, I'm not bloody well wearing it. And then look, here we are now, past the Christmas rush of 2022, and we don't have this issue anymore. So, and you know what they would have said? We got through the best winter ever because of masking. You think they wouldn't have tried to then try to dress up their solution?
Well, I imagine it's also the vaccines was really what people were harping on too at that time. It's like, they
were trying to harp. Sorry to cut you off. But I was looking at an article yesterday from City TV News, June 2022. Is it time that we update the definition of what fully vaccinated means?
Right.
Would have been utter bullshit because we didn't do it, and yet here we are. To your God principle, Omicron saved it. It wasn't a third shot because we didn't do it. It wasn't more masking because we didn't do it. And we have enough herd immunity, which has now been proven to be like 90% when you have natural immunity and 90% in static. What the hell are we doing?
Yeah, it really did.
It's embarrassing. And you look in the client's eyes and you see that they don't want to confront this.
Yeah.
It's like, it's again, Plato's cave. They do not want to know there's light outside of the cave. And this is a deep psychological thing. So I have the same problems with AI. I'm sure it'll turn out fine in the future, but we need to take a full holistic approach to what this is.
Well, I'm not so sure it's going to turn out okay in the future. Again, I mean, you sort of assume everything will eventually be all right, but I don't know. We've talked about AI. I mean, it's just here's the problem.
I know you love computers. Tell me, do you want to tell me your favorite part of ChatGPT or something like this?
No, I don't. Well, I think it's dangerous. I think it's. It really concerns me. Like I hear people like Daniel Messler, who's like a cybersecurity guy. He just raves on about how great ChatGPT is, and it's like, I mean, in terms of. For example, like coding, like you can say, and this is one of the first things I did because I was like, can you write me a program to do, like, for example, write me a blackjack program in Python, boom, done. So it's like coding is solved. You know what I mean? Like anything that can be coded, like you might have to prompt it to tweak things here and there, but you can get it done really quickly.
So they've moved society over to these, what were considered white collar jobs of, coding and stuff like that, and will now be less than blue collar jobs because AI can literally replace those people.
Yeah, and
brings us back to vinyl records and getting a haircut.
It brings you back to the point, like, is anybody going to know how to code anymore? Like, you know what I mean? Like, and is that struggle going to be taken away? Or are these people just going to be on some universal income with the rest of us?
I was white collar and I'm on UBI.
Yeah, and so what happens to a society, to an individual when you have this? Or we're just going to be talking about how many genders, like, today I'm this, and it's like this complicated, algorithm of how they feel precisely because that's all people can talk about anymore.
This is why they're creating the metaverse, because simply you're not going to have enough to do, so you're going to have like infinite amount of distractions, and you're going to be doing your self-serving pleasure principle, which is going to then divert into I just want more power in life, and I don't want to have the AI to tell me I can't have something. It's not good. I don't think it's going to be good for the human experience.
Yeah, like it's kind of laughable in many ways. Like at a very, it's sort of like you were saying, like diverting your attention. It's like, I think a lot of this technologically is very exciting and impressive, but at the same time, we're just human beings. We're just really animals. So it's like, and there's certain things you need to struggle, you need that ratio, and, eventually you're going to die. So like, don't you want, like, how do you want to spend that life, right? Do you want to spend it just, riding some technological wave where you're on top of the world all the time?
Maybe they just want us to create like mass suicide or something. Like it's like some weird.
But who's
like,
they?
Well, the green, the whole green. Like there's too many humans on Earth. Like bullshit. The planet can hold 1 trillion people if we know how to just use our resources properly. There's absolutely not like.
I think 1 trillion would be
society. There's a famous person who said that in the tech field, but and. They have numbers to prove it. But my point is, like, when you look at the collapse of civilizations, it's always predicated by a collapse in population. It's not because they grew too much. I mean, you can say they grew too much and therefore ran out of resources, but we can manage ourselves better than that globally these days. So whether it's Easter Island, the Spartans, Egypt, like it's always Aztecs, there was a decline in population, So I don't see a problem with even more people. Like the more people you have, the more brains, and what's more powerful than a human brain, so it's more chances to utilize it correctly.
Right. I think overall that does sort of win out. I think I don't think we have to worry about overpopulation just because by virtue of the declining birth rates, but like,
abundance is amazing, and we have nothing. We're going to run out of matter. like you can we're at the point we can almost make something from anything.
Well, you can have like the biodiversity of our planet is deteriorating.
I think far more dangerous is our economic systems deteriorating. Like if Rome had infinite amounts of financial resources, they would have survived.
Well, I mean, but you can't pluck one thing out of.
True. It's a synergy of many things. That's a very, very good point. You can't, because you could have ultimate power, but you don't have enough manpower to actually have armies and this and that. And you could say you could go find them, but you can't find them because they don't exist anymore. But then it becomes a population thing. Like, I think if you've got people and money, you can do almost anything.
I've been reading about the Punic Wars recently, which is like interesting, and I didn't realize that Rome really sort of grew into an empire by virtue of destroying Carthage.
Yeah.
Like that was really their, that was their, what do you say? Like, that was their World War II where they came out on top.
And barely. Took a long time. Hannibal really gave them a run for their money. Yeah.
Hannibal and his brother, Hasrapul or something, but they both were kind of tag teaming for a while. Like Hannibal sort of got all the press, but what with the elephants? They both had elephants actually, but I guess the elephants were indigenous to Africa or something. So it was like,
they were like the Romans
were like, whoa, we don't have those here.
I mean, Alexander, hundreds of years, almost 1,000 years prior to that, ran into the same problem when they went to India, and they had the Asian elephants over there too.
Right.
That's an awesome battle, because at some point, the way it goes historically, they had all their phalanxes and they knew exactly what to do, and the shit hit the fan, right? And they basically had to break ranks and became like a bloodbath. There's a reason why. Did you ever see that movie Troy with they came out by
Brad Pitt?
No. Sorry, not Troy. Alexander. That came out with Colin Farrell.
No, I didn't see that.
And there's a moment where they get into that battle, and it actually the entire film goes black and white because there's so much blood. If it was in color, it would be banned. So they did a great job in that particular scene. So it just became like a free for all because they finally nearly lost after taking down the Persians and everything. There's power vacuums though, and then once that vacuum was once that space was now depleted because Hannibal, their empire was receding, Rome fills in the space. They could divert their resources to expanding into Germania and stuff.
Did you ever think, it's kind of
I love this stuff.
but like there had to have been a point where the soldiers are all up on these elephants and they're marching through the Alps and it's freezing and the wind's hitting them. They just kind of look around. They're like, what the fuck are we doing? Like, why are we even doing this?
Or were they part of that non-disclosure agreement? We have to be doing this. We know it's the good thing. I don't know. It's psychological.
Yeah.
Obviously, they've created, one of the interesting things Rome did is and we really are, they say, when did Rome collapse? It never really collapsed because we are the living descendants of it, even in the most legal of terms. Like they were the first empire that started citizenship. Like you weren't just like a national, you were given citizenship. Yeah. So when Rome would take over Morocco, they're like, well, we're taking you over, but guess what, guys? You get to be Roman citizens. Oh, what does that mean? Well, that means there's going to be courts. And guess what? When you go in there as a Roman citizen, you have certain rights. And yes, you're going to pay taxes, but look, we're building you aqueducts. So you're going to get your money's worth, Yeah,
those famous Roman aqueducts.
Sexy little things. So, I mean, we're really living in the shadow of that kind of system still.
Yeah. Yeah, it was quite advanced for the time, like their ideas of sort of what to bestow on their citizens.
Yeah, and they actually turned their back a little. When they were examining how to build their empire, they were looking at Athens and Sparta, and they actually turned their back a little bit on the whole Athenian democracy thing, because look at these guys. The mob voted this way one day, and 6 months later they voted another way. You don't have any consistency to your project. They actually democracy, I don't think really got even verbally used again until the 1800s. We didn't. So it's it wasn't like Rome did it. They actually followed more the Spartan, where they had two kings and one balanced each other, and it was a senate and all that sort of stuff. And there was citizenship, and you had rights, but you didn't just go and drop rocks, black rock, white rock, and decide who we're going to attack next. Yeah. So that we're dealing with it. That's where I think, going back to ChatGPT, we've been dealing with these. We've gone into this in other podcasts, that the fundamental problem is we don't quite understand what makes a perfect human life.
Yeah. Yeah, and we're so just progressing at such a fast pace technologically. We just haven't come anywhere near catching up with almost the ethics behind it, or the, whether it is important to do these things. Like, do we really want, like, I mean, it certainly makes it more convenient to code something, but do we want a whole, swath of individuals who don't know how to code anymore from scratch?
Do you remember that there was a Star Trek episode, I think Next Generation, and they basically come to this planet. This planet's got really advanced humanoid-like people on it. Mm-hmm. And they're very peaceful. They have no wars, nice long life, longevity. And so they're really curious, like, who are these wonderful people? Let's go down and meet them. And then they realize that they have some sort of biodome, and the biodome is collapsing. So like, oh no, should we tell them and help them? We're going to break the whole prime directive, right? Because it's a shame. They seem like such lovely people. And as they actually start asking them, like, do you know about the biodome? And like, yes, we're kind of aware of it, but we don't know how to fix it. Well, you built it. How do you know how to fix it? Well, the computers made it for us. Well, who made the computers? Our elders. Well, who are the elders? Don't you have that information anymore? No, we've lost it to time now.
Oh, wow.
So because their life became so convenient, it actually was beckoning their total demise. So the whole, do we interfere and help these people or not? Yeah.
That's interesting. What a forward-thinking show, Star Trek.
Yeah. And little stories like that, and that's why it's hard to articulate when you're just chatting with your friends here and there. But they kind of reside somewhere in your subconscious. Like, watch out. Kind of like like European, like fairy tales and stuff. You're told Rumpelstiltskin or something.
Right.
You're like, there's little truths in there about how even the Bible, like how, and Jordan Peterson will get into this. Like, there's psychological truths behind this. That look, you're going to look at the world through some sort of structure. If it's not religious, you're going to look at it through a scientific and there's no guarantee that the structure you're looking at the world through is any better than the previous structure, because it's going to come with its own set of faults as well.
Yeah, and those same kind of hints or Easter eggs or whatever are going to be in any tapestry you happen to subscribe to, because it's very subconscious, or maybe planted there by supreme beings, people who architected this game we're in or whatever. That's all very fascinating, and I look at things like, again, with the deep fakes or the ChatGPT. It's like, I look at it and I'm like, it is almost inevitable that we're going to like basically it's like, how do we number one, do we want to stop this or slow this or do something here to halt the progression of this at such a rapid pace, so we can kind of catch up with it and like have talks about it and like, ingest it all before we start, like, right now it's like people sending fake videos out of like, Biden saying something, or like, who knows, you'll get your own, I just saw last night on the news how, like, phone scammers are now able to, I had somebody call my grandmother one time and say that I was in prison and I was them, and could she wire some money or whatever? And they were, my family was about to do it, and they finally got in touch with me, and I was like, like, I'm not in Montreal or whatever.
I heard Microsoft now, they only need 3 seconds of your voice, and they can extrapolate from that like an entire
3 seconds. That's crazy.
So we're doomed with the podcast.
Right.
Like, basically.
But that's, I mean, what do we do about that? And I sort of was thinking about that, because when preparing for this podcast, I was like, okay, well, I didn't want to just kind of come on here and rant and like just be like, okay, well, here's the problem, like, somebody else figure it out. And so you start thinking about, okay, what are some reasonable ways we could deal with this? And the only thing I could kind of come up with is something that would be punitive, and something that would be something that kind of goes against my grain as sort of a, borderline libertarian or whatever. I was thinking, you need harsh penalties. You need harsh penalty, like human cloning, for example.
Even though you're a libertarian, there's still laws.
There's still, being a libertarian almost assumes that the average person is going to be of a certain intellect, because you can always say market forces and this and that, but if you have the average person is just not, like, we're still all part of the earth, so like people can ruin it for the rest of us, right? Like, but you get like something like human cloning is something that was banned, right? Like, it's banned in a lot of places. You're not allowed to, clone a human being, and it's So you get into the situation where maybe we need really harsh penalties for something like, if you create a video of like Joe Biden or somebody else or anybody really, like just across the board, if you're going to impersonate somebody else and make a video misrepresenting that person, it's like 20 years to life.
Yeah, so I think we're hitting now the stage in society, and actually we should have done this a long time ago. It's almost suspicious that we haven't done it yet. But we need to set down a real new charter of rights around our digital lives, and like fake, deep fakes and AI, and like what's actually going to be permissible, not permissible, and sort this out at the highest levels. Unfortunately, what I see is a lot of that energy and time and brain power going into like, we need to combat misinformation, which is in the realm of, things spreading over the internet, but not about protecting your rights on an individual level.
Interesting.
It's more about putting like the onus on centralizing the narrative around the authority figures, and then let the corporations have at it and just, chip away and sell you whatever they want through digital, or criminals, like you're saying, with deep fake vocals. Like where are the rights around that stuff?
Yeah.
This needs to be a national conversation. And I don't think we need a national conversation over misinformation. It's simply like hate speech is hate speech, and you're an adult. Like that's it,
Yeah, like let's, again, the question of focusing our attention, like, this is something that is immediate, that is happening now. And like, we have nothing to protect us. Like there is, and it's something that over the next year even is going to become something that's becomes more and more urgent, because you're going to get more people faking, speeches from people. Like all it takes is one really big swindle that kind of like causes a major incident. And at that point, of course, then it'll be like, oh, all hands on deck. We got to take care of it. But it's like, we should do that now while there's still, it's still in its infancy.
Back when ISIS and we're getting those videos that were beheadings and stuff like that, like imagine in the future, those were just all fake. And like literally it's enough to cause you to go off to war and divert trillions of dollars. And like literally you're creating the greatest transfer of wealth ever based on fake narratives.
Well, you remember...
it really becomes like 1984. We were always at war against Oceania or whatever it was.
Right. Yeah.
Like, how do you know?
What's the guy's name? The Dilbert guy who had the... he said had that kind of like racist rant on Twitter.
I don't know.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I forget his name.
I don't follow that stuff, Jason.
The guy who created Dilbert had this.
Oh, the cartoonist. Okay,
the cartoonist, and he was saying like, white people should stay away from black people, and like this whole thing.
Because
if
black people said they don't want to be around white people.
Yeah, part of some study or whatever.
I did quickly see that. Yeah.
But when I first saw that, I was like, is that real? Because that doesn't seem like anything anybody who is in the public eye would say. Like it just seemed like such an outrageous. Like just in today's age, especially, even if you thought it, it's like, why would you make a speech about it? And I thought, oh, this is probably a deep fake. Like, and I think that, he almost could have just been like, yeah, it was a deep fake. You know what I mean? Out of the repercussions, like I didn't say
prove
that.
It wasn't me.
Yeah.
Well, that's where it brings it back to like, going into the future, like courts have to be done in person. You can't have like a Zoom. How do you know that person was really there?
Yeah.
Well, this is the scary thing. Have you and I just walked into something? Is all this going to be rectified by a solution? Some form of digital ID to verify you are the person that I said I'm talking to? And so if we're going to have a Zoom call and sign a mortgage, I can be guaranteed that the person is really them. And the only way to know that is you're going to enter your digital ID.
Yeah.
How do you get around that? We've talked about all the problems. I bet you that'll be the solution that's presented.
Well, I don't think that...
And you can be like, hail the digital ID. Now we have a new reality. What? The digital ID assures your reality?
Well, in a way, though, that might be the only thing that like, you do need some aspect of authenticity. And I think that you start looking at like...
it used to be a handshake.
Okay, old folk.
Well, as I pull up my Marlboros and jump on my horse.
But I mean, you do need something to sort of authentic. It's like a passport, right? Like we have passports. We have like, and I'm not arguing that digital ID needs to be tied to every facet of, humanity. I just mean that you need something almost like a public-private key pair. Yeah. Like you need something
like
that
your
is
Bitcoin.
Inarguably yours. Yeah. That's why I think the blockchain is will be utilized in some way.
Is there two energies, and this is your world more than mine? So when Elon Musk, who I'm not necessarily 100% behind, however, most of the time I feel like he's a techie person who's really just trying to create a lot of cool tech and it comes off as very decentralized. And do you feel like Bitcoin then is that kind of energy, and we have that type of tech advancing simultaneously with those who want to use such tech in a much more centralized fashion? Mm-hmm. So I agree with you. If your digital ID was just like your own personal password and it had no bearing on anyone else could touch it, it's a really cool thing. But all of a sudden, if it gets tied to like, your alarm force knew you just walked in today because your digital ID, and you don't even have to tap in your code because we know it's you walking in.
Right.
And as you pass a Starbucks, your phone will ring because we just know you walked past one. And do you want a coffee at a discount today? Like, it can get so bad, you know? And that's where I think we have to come back. We almost have to have like a new charter of human rights, a new digital human rights.
Yeah, and you wonder if they're talking about it, right? Like you wonder if this is a conversation. You hear the things that our governments are talking about, and it sounds completely
why they're
on the wrong
not?
path.
Because of Klaus Schwab. Because I think they really don't want us to have that type of individual freedom. Why would they?
But you were saying about how they were pushing the digital ID. So like they're
but they're going to use it in the more centralized fashion rather than the Elon Musk-esque decentralized fashion. Because why would a government ever want to give up? I think that's why give up power. Because I think that's why George Washington and all the founding fathers actually were onto something. If you're in power and you want to do things, the only thing that's going to help you do more things is to have more power. So you have to have the rules in order to stop governments becoming too powerful.
Right.
Right. They could see psychologically that this was the beast that it can become.
I just thought of something.
So sorry to cut you off. That's why I don't know if it's considered a conspiracy theory. It's just more of like a self-serving set of ideals. And you can cut off the prime minister, but it's going to keep going because it's really just coming down to human nature.
Yeah. I can see that playing out. You also wonder like the rapidity of our technological progress and everything like that. Like if you take this if you sort of like extrapolate from there and you say, okay, eventually we're going to have this situation where there is no individual anymore. We're all part of this simulacrum that we've created. We're all like, basking in some weird metaverse like utopia. The more likely that is, the more likely it is that we're already in that kind of a loop. Like we've already done that and we've done something to wipe our memory so that we are not remembering it. Like we think that we're like, this is, we're encountering all this stuff for the first time. But like, it is more likely that we've already been through this loop and we're kind of going through it again.
What do you have? This is a bit of a trick question. What do you have to kind of prove that we're not in a simulation?
I have nothing to prove. I have nothing to prove that we're not, because anything that I could come up with as evidence, I could have just say, well, it's just baked into the simulation. Like,
so this is where I think, like even like science, like at the end of the day, it's faith. Science has to at least, when they're like, I'm going to research something, you have to at least admit the things you're looking at are what they appear to be.
Yeah.
That requires a certain amount of faith.
Right.
Because if they aren't what you think you're looking at, then the whole thing just falls apart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like there is a certain amount of faith baked into science to some extent. But I think this is where, things like intuition come into play. And I think the scientific method is extremely important because you have to, you could drive yourself crazy thinking of all the hypotheticals. And you can say like, okay, like
at a certain
we don't
point.
know. Yeah, like at a certain point, it's like, I don't know, like you listen to that Eric Weinstein thing. And I found that such an interesting conversation. And yeah, he rambles and yeah, it's like whatever, but like this talk of going beyond general relativity and this talk of like, I don't know, like thinking in multi-dimensions and stuff like that. I was trying to wrap my head around it listening to him. And I'm kind of like, well, yeah, like that's, the further out you go with that, the more faith-based it gets.
Space and time being one. Did they mention that? Like,
space-time is one,
it's
but
one
like
thing. Like it's quite amazing,
Yeah. Well, that's already. I mean, that is all. Like Einstein proved that, but it's like he's talking about stuff that are like is kind of, going beyond, stretching beyond general relativity, which is like kind of the highest point we have in science in terms of between that and like, quantum physics. It's like you really get into, you can talk about it sort of as a layman. Like this stuff presumably when they're doing it mathematically, and that all makes sense. So it's all based on something. But like, if I look at it, I don't understand the math. So I look at it and I reach the limits of my sort of vocabulary with that, where it's like, okay, like that, you get into some faith-based
that's
stuff.
why
So like, I don't know.
That's why I love in math, like, when they say like, well, the Greeks didn't invent math. All these other cultures always knew that 1 + 1 = 2. And the Egyptians obviously knew what Pythagoras' theorem was because they built the pyramids. You can't simply build such a structure if you don't a squared plus b squared equals c squared, But what was interesting, what the Greeks did before anyone else, and why you could say they invented math, is because they invented the mathematical proofs. So right. 1 + 1 = 1. Okay. What is the proof to show that these two things actually equal 1 + 1 = 2? Right. And if you look at it, it's not that's an easier one, but it's a complicated formula.
It's a complicated formula
to get to 1 + 1 = 2, and it's set on certain presumptions and whatnot. It's fascinating, and then you extrapolate that into everything. So even the math there, to your point, they had to prove on the most fundamental level.
Yeah,
it couldn't just be like, well, this is just self-explanatory. Obviously, 1 + 1 = 2. Prove it. Yeah, do you like that? You like that
I
one?
just try to think
mathematical, and that's why you can argue that they invented mathematics, because without the proofs, you don't really have mathematics. You got a bunch of formulas, but you don't actually have the study of mathematics.
Well, I imagine there's certain presumptions that come in almost. How would it? There is something baked in ahead of time that you have to take for granted. What's the word I'm looking for? Like. Something is like self-evident or whatever, right? Like, I mean, what is one? How much do you want to deconstruct something like that, right? Like, because that's the thing, right? Like, the deeper you go, the more, you go beyond the atom and you get into the quarks and everything like that. It's like, okay, like, is there something smaller than that? Sure. Like, you could conceivably, like, you could.
We're not really here if there's space between us.
Yeah, exactly. It's all insubstantial. Like, we're all just talking about, like, when I'm staring at you, I'm seeing what my brain is presenting as a representation of you. But it's, but how much do you want to, like, how much does that serve us to deconstruct that?
This might be something I was saving for the end, but I'll ask it now. Okay. And it's a tough one because this might be, because I think you're getting there. What then is the meaning of life?
All right. Yeah, like I think that really it comes down to faith. I think it comes down to, ultimately, if you're going to ask a question like that, you have to believe there's an underlying presumption of meaning, right? Like, you have to, like, if you're saying what's the meaning, it's like, you could say, like, well, who's to say there is a meaning, right? But I believe there is a meaning because I believe, I believe in God. Why do I believe in God? Because of my personal experience. Like, and you have can I prove it?
You've experienced God.
I've experienced it. I've experienced certain principles that I think, like, for example, like, we talked about the struggle. It's like the struggle, like, when I go to see my family, I went to my brother's yesterday. It was a 3-hour drive to go there. I saw him for like 2 hours and then came back. And it's like, is that worth it? It's like, yeah, at the end of the day, I didn't want to necessarily make the trip. Like, it's a lot. And it's like, he has 2 new kids. And it's like, really, like, it's a hard thing to do. I'm not feeling the best these days. So it was kind of like it was a bit of a struggle. But I went there, and the time I spent there, and I saw my mom and everything like that, and it was very, like, fulfilling. That's the word I would say. I didn't have a great time. I wasn't like partying it up or whatever, but it was fulfilling. I felt spiritually nourished from it. So was it worth it? Yeah, it was worth it. Like, could I bake that into a game and say, like, like that's my dopamine levels were high or something? No, it wasn't. But somehow there was something else that made me feel good about it, and I feel that's a sustaining force, right?
Yeah,
so
that's amazing. I didn't think I thought you weren't going to even be able to start the answer. That's an amazing answer. Right. It was unfair of me. I just dropped this bomb in the middle of a podcast. Right. Yeah. For me, like, the meaning of life is almost verbatim what you said. It's like the adventure along the route. Yeah. It's not the destination. It's not that dopamine hit at the end. It's not the convenience. It's actually the adventure along the route.
Yeah.
Like, where is that adventure found? Like, it's found in faith. Like, I just have faith it's going to be worth going to see your brother as you did that day. Like, I know this is going to be a good thing. I just got to go for it. You know, does it make logical sense? Not really. It was faith-based decision. Is this person right for me? How do we find out? By binding ourselves to it. And then seeing if that, you know, and truly binding yourself to another person. That's the only way you're going to find out if they're right for you. That's a moment of faith.
Yeah.
You know, it really is, going back to what you're saying, like atoms and cells, like it is like it's on the atomic level. You're literally binding two people together based on faith to see if this is what is right for you. Are you going to find your meaning in life in that? And how do we understand more about life? By binding ourselves to it. It's literally the same thing. Bind yourself to life. That's a faith-based leap. You know? And when we get into the realm of deep fakes and digital IDs and AI, I see an unbinding to life.
Yeah.
It's less faith. It's more, in a sense, more predictable maybe, or more what's more predictable than an algorithm? It's literally been baked into it, right? There's no there's no adventure along the way per se that hasn't been preordained by the algorithm, right? So that for me is all faith. You bind yourself to the partner to see if they're right for you. You bind yourself to life to see it's life itself. Like, I'm going to take it on. Is this right? And that's the adventure along the route.
And it's really interesting because, you know, I can just imagine myself on my deathbed, and it's like you look back and say, how different really was my experience from that of somebody thousands of years ago? You know, you born, you lived a little bit, you experienced a little bit, and then you died. And like all these sort of extraneous little peripherals that you have along the way that are like, you know, the fact that I'm able to go on the internet, whereas 2,000 years ago they couldn't do that. You know, they make your experience a little different, but ultimately you're talking about, it's almost beside the point in terms of what life is all about in the first place, right? So like, we've gotten, again, a question of where you brought this to a question of distraction and like, where is your focus? And like, I think that that's a big problem with society today is our focus is so far askew of where it should be that we're not talking about, you know, individuals, our rights going forward in terms of, you know, like how are we, knowing that we're human beings and we have these sort of underlying predispositions, how are we then going to allow this new world to fit with our needs as opposed to just, you know, bullheadedly, you know, progressing along like at a, you know, comet's pace toward whatever disaster we're heading toward, you know, like, let's remember who serves who here, you know?
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, I'm sure at a certain point when they had, you know, the first ships crossing the Mediterranean, this is amazing. We can experience so much more than, you know, living in my own little Trumanville sort of thing, you know. But inevitably they had a life, they lived it, they died. Did it really change how they perceived their life? To a degree. You know, did it make their life easier? Sure. Trading, importing goods. But did it change the meaning they got out of their life? Probably not.
Yeah.
You know, you could, yeah, you know, whether you've owned a pet or had a child, you can find meaning in the most simplest of things.
Yeah. And it's funny, you know, like I don't have kids, so I saw my brother, but my brother's very much in many ways like me in the sense of how we see the world and, you know, like sort of laugh at the same things or whatever. And we've always had similar personalities. Like he's definitely, we're definitely different people, but it's like, he's, you know, I sort of like similar enough that, you know, seeing him yesterday, like he is like just acts like a buffoon around his kids, right? Like talking in baby talk. And it's like there's other, I felt like saying, you know, like we're all here, sitting here watching you, right? Like, you're like, is this how you're behaving now? Like, and it's crazy. He's just obsessed with his kids and he's like acting completely different. And it's like, I was trying to figure out like, what is causing him to act like this, you know? And it's like, oh, it's love. And it's like, he feels this bond toward his kids that I don't know. Like but it's so amazing to see.
There's another Jason in there that you're not aware of.
Right. Yeah. But it's just elevates the human experience, right? Yeah. Because you're like, he doesn't care that he looks like an idiot right now. He's just trying to be, you know, this is how he's expressing how he feels. And that's much more important to him than how he looks. Yeah.
And that had nothing to do with any technological invention.
Exactly.
It's really rudimentary.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's almost like technological advances are like fashion. They're nice to have, but they don't inevitably change your basic needs.
Right. and it's funny, like even talking to him, because I was like, so how was it? I was talking to him and his wife, and my mom left and everything, and I was there, just talking with them, and I was like, so how were things? I mean, like in terms of the last month, and they were like, January was really hard. They were like really struggling to kind of get through. Like they had the kids in December, and it was like the first full month, and it was it's like January, so everything's crappy as it is. But like, and it was sounded like a real struggle, and it kind of got a little bit easier. But like, it was really, you could almost see that it was that, they climbed the mountain, and now they're kind of on the other side of the mountain. It's still not easy. They're still like navigating their way, but they're starting to, like, there was an achievement there that, like that was part of the experience.
That was the adventure along the route.
Yeah.
The hero's journey. You have to visit the underworld, and it's dark in order to come out the other side. But you never come out lesser of a man.
Yeah.
You just don't. I think with this digital AI stuff and deep fakes, you will come out lesser of a man.
Right. Yeah.
You will be diminished as a human. You won't be enhanced. It'll be sold as an this is a weird thing. Everything we're sold today is literally, it's like the upside down. It's the complete opposite. We'll be sold that it's an enhancement of sorts, and it will be in some ways for it to make sense, but inevitably it'll diminish you as a human being.
Yeah. Yeah, like you wonder whose benefit it's for, right? Because like who can benefit from this sort of ability to replicate other people, and like and if there's no benefit, maybe like human cloning, like we start legislating against it. Like, we can do that still, right? Like, I mean, and yeah, like I think, I don't like to impugn people's freedom. You don't want to impugn scientific progress, but you start going down dead ends again. You get back to the atom bomb. It's like, okay, like, like there was a necessity to do it at the time. Does it make sense to like, but if there was no war, if we had a peaceful society and we were pursuing this as a weapon, then does that make sense? Like, of course it doesn't, because like it can't benefit anybody. Like there has to be a benefit to society to continue to do something. Otherwise, we should shut it down as a society.
Yep. Yeah.
So I don't know. Is there,
we are Frankenstein.
This is a lot of stuff to talk about, and it's like, I don't like the idea of coming on here and not really having solutions to problems, but it's like, and sometimes I'll listen to podcasts, and it's like, I find it interesting, and I find it like, I think it's important, but unless other people are all having the same conversation, it kind of is almost like whistling in the wind. Like you're talking, we might as well, I guess what I'm saying is, this needs to be a national conversation, and like countries need to be talking about this at the highest level.
There you go, centralizing things again. Or is this la resistance, and it's just people having conversations on a low level, in such a small level that it doesn't even hit the national powers that be radars, and it changes the consciousness of where humanity's going.
Maybe I would like to think that, but I don't know.
It's more organic and small, but it's small incremental changes that actually win the game.
Well, but not if the other changes are taking place at a staccato pace, right? Like if you have technological progress happening so quickly, like we could have our little conversations about, how like the ethics of such and such, and meanwhile, they created a doomsday device.
I mean, I do love looking at stories and, like I said, grabbing like the meaning out of them. But correct me if I'm wrong. Like the story of Adam and Eve, when the snake comes down and offers the temptation, it was of knowledge, right?
Yeah.
So I'm always skeptical of knowledge, because knowledge kind of will, when used incorrectly, take away from faith.
Yeah.
Well, I know this. I don't have to just believe it. And it's the knowing. In agnostic, gnostic, they can get into the root words are really interesting, right? And so then, was there something there that the knowing will create short-term gains? Like obviously, now that you're naked, that you need shelter, that shelter needs heating, you need to have a agriculture, not hunter-gatherer. No. And now we're at this point now, like let's call it 15,000 years since then, let's say, where we have increased the amount of knowledge at such an exponential rate. The trick is starting to play out, that it is changing faster than we can possibly understand whether these changes are good for us or not.
Yeah.
And that's the trick. And that's what causes the death of humanity.
Yeah. And then,
But the trick is that it's, of course, don't you want to be a little warmer? That's good, isn't it? Yes, it is. Because you understand what it means to be cold, and it takes time to build a house. But now, literally every week, there's such a leap in technology, and we are not ready to handle these leaps.
Yeah.
And that will make us trip up, screw up, and, we possibly end humanity.
You ever think that...
It brings it back to your God principle, because maybe that's when the thing has to actually kick in, that will always tap out and not let us reach that point.
Yeah, you wonder, right? Like, I mean, do you think that, we'll all, annihilate ourselves, and when we're up there at the gates of heaven or whatever, God's going to be like, man, I couldn't have been any clearer with that fucking Bible. Like, it's like...
It was literally knowledge in the apple. It was a freaking snake, dude. It wasn't a kitty cat.
Yeah, it's like, what do I have to do? Like...
I think, and so this is where, again, we need to know ourselves as humans, because like I was saying before, those who are more engineering minded and just like to tinker away and build for the sake of building, maybe that's part of being humans. We just like to create. We're like little ants. We create because we want to create. But then there's the higher order level of thinking that I think it's more like people oriented, psychological. It's a little more incorporeal. You can't touch it, you can't feel it, but what makes a good human? And we need to get the merger of these two things just right. And I think as the world has become more technological, it's been easier to focus on the one and neglect the other.
Yeah.
And I think that's the story of the last 100 years.
Yeah, we've got to get the balance right again. All right, well, I anything else you want to say?
No, that was... I think we got to some... I think we hit... it sometimes reminds me when I listen to like a Jordan Peterson, ramble away, and you're like, oh man, like it's just... I think I'm losing my focus, and all of a sudden... boom, out comes like a truth bomb.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, I almost turned the channel, and he was rambling.
He does that sometimes.
And you're like, that was like, I feel like I just listened to like an Aristotle moment, wow, like he literally got to a truth. And it's like a dark tunnel that he's weaving his way through, and he can be easily lost. I think when you have nice conversations like this, at a certain much less profound level, you have those moments where you touch down to certain truths. And you walk away from it, and you like, chew on the fat a little bit. Like, there was something there.
Yeah.
I don't know what that was, but something is there.
Yeah.
And that's what I think we do best with these sort of conversations. It's like, there's in a common man's sort of way, there's something there, man. Let's look in that direction. Kind of like you're steering the ship in a certain direction.
Yeah.
I don't know how far the journey is or where it's quite going, but it needs to move that way.
Right.
You know? And that's why I think it's fantastic, and I hope everybody who listens to it finds it the same way.
Yes, and thank you for listening today, and we'll bid you all a good day. Please subscribe if you haven't, and we will talk to you next time.
Take care, folks.